The Senate of this new 19th Congress gets the ball rolling, discussing possible amendments to the 51-year-old 1987 Constitution. Committee on Constitutional Amendments Chair and neophyte Senator Robin Padilla says charter change should primarily be aimed at improving the lives of Filipinos, especially the poor and marginalized. Is the country ready for this, and how should we do it? What do we need to change? If we don't need change, are there other ways to address problems and issues some claim are rooted in the Constitution? We've been discussing charter change for decades, but nothing really gets off the ground. Is it time to revisit the Constitution? Is it time for change? Good evening, I'm Pia Hontiveros. Welcome to your weekly political appointment fix, Politics as usual. Our first guest tonight, a member of the 1986 Constitutional Commission, Attorney Christian Monsod. Good evening, Attorney Monsod. Thank you very much for being with us. Sir, can we begin with this? Do we need to amend the Constitution, and why or why not? And if we do need to amend it, how should we go about it? Attorney Monsod? Do we have Attorney Monsod on Zoom? All right. While we're waiting for a better signal with Attorney Christian Monsod, we're going to go to our second guest, Professor Tony Lavinia, although we do call him Dean Tony for the longest time. He's joining us also via Zoom. Dean Tony, Professor Tony, thank you very much for being with us, and it's good to see you back on your feet. So I have the same questions for you, Dean Tony. Itong tanong na, do we need to amend the Constitution? And why or why not? And if we do, how do we go about it?
The answer to the question is yes, because it's an imperfect document and it can always be improved. All of us have pet peeves about the Constitution. My pet peeve is the presidency. We establish an authoritarian, all-powerful presidency. Even with separation of powers, we ended up with a very powerful president, and we've seen how that has happened, how bad that can be. But it's about timing. When is the right time to do it? You obviously want to do it for the right reasons. Unfortunately, most of the time, the reason that really is behind almost all the proposals is that the Congress people just want to extend their terms, and or lift the term limits, and that's really self-serving, and that's not good for the country. So for me, how that answers the question how.
Right.
I think the only way should be through a constitutional convention. We cannot trust Congress, especially the House of Representatives, to do this task of becoming a constituent assembly to amend or revise the Constitution. I think we should do it by constitutional convention, by a non-partisan constitutional convention that have as its sole job to revise the Constitution according to the interests of the Filipino people and not according to the interests of politicians.
So a constitutional convention made up of elected delegates, which will hopefully live up to everybody's standards, as opposed to a constituent assembly, which means that both the Senate and the House convene as a constituent assembly, which is something you don't want to see. Correct? Is that correct, Dean Tony?
Yes. I would suggest that because the problem with all the attempts of Congress to change the Constitution, The problem has always been the people have seen the underlying motivation, and the underlying motivation is essentially term limits. That's really what they're just
Oo.
interested in.
Pero kung
That's
con-con,
why that's why when Justice Puno, just to finish this,
yes.
that's why when Justice Puno came out with a really good, at least something, a proposal to be debated federalism, they had no interest in doing that. They have no interest in substantive changes because really their interest is just to extend their terms, extend the term of the president, extend everyone's terms so everyone is happy.
Pero kung con-con, Dean Tony, we will have essentially, basically, the same people running for delegate to the con-con, the same people who would run in a regular election, the same people who would run for Congress. Hindi po ba?
That's not true,
No?
Pia.
Okay.
That's not true. When we went through that in 1973, 71 rather, quite a lot of people ran that were not from political families, that were not politicians. Quite a lot of lawyers, a lot of scholars, priests. They run. So that's not true at all. Of course, there will always be some politicians. But if you put in, conditions like they cannot run or be appointed for X number of years after they draft the Constitution, then you will weed out the politicians from
I see.
from
Okay.
from a body like that.
Yes.
So
Oh.
historically, we've had a uh, uh, good experience with our constitutional conventions. 1935, 1971, until Marcos essentially closed it down and forced everyone to come up with
Okay.
a constitution that was to his liking.
Dean Tony, sabi po ninyo, one of your pet peeves, the presidency, as you said, an authoritarian, all-powerful. This same presidency that was, well, created, hindi po ba, by the 1987 Constitution also. And essentially
Well,
here, what is
yeah.
it you want to change here? What is it you want to amend or revise regarding the presidency in the Constitution?
Well, to be honest, when the 87 Constitutional Commission was convening and drafting, I would have preferred that we went the parliamentary route rather than the presidency route. Our presidency, I always say this to my constitutional law classes, because people have the notion that our presidency and our system is copied from the Americans. Not true. Our system is copied from the colonial system of Spain and the colonial system of the USA. Our president is not patterned after the US president. It's not very powerful. The US president shares powers with the Congress. I mean, for sure. One can argue that Congress is more powerful. Certainly, Congress can assert its privileges against the U.S. president. That's not true in our case. So they can do some check and balance, but they really cannot be aggressive against the president here because they just have very little power compared to that. Our presidency, and that's 87 Constitution, that's 1935 Constitution, that's 1973 Constitution. It's patterned after the American colonial governor general and the Spanish colonial governor general, which had absolute powers of martial law. The U.S. president doesn't have a martial law power, at least explicit one. Ours have, because it was a colonial power that needed to oppress the Filipino people. So that's really, for me, that's the problematic one, because even with checks and balances, and an 87 Constitution certainly has more of those checks and balances. Before determined president, and by the way, I would point to President Noynoy Aquino and President Duterte are actually very determined presidents, right? Who would set aside things, rules, norms for the political goals, and they might actually think they're correct, like corruption, for example. For Noynoy Aquino, he went after Chief Justice
Renato Corona.
Renato Corona. I mean, use all his powers to have Corona ousted. Duterte went after Chief Justice Melo Sereno as well. And there you see how it leaves a
Okay.
bad taste in the mouth having an all-powerful president.
Well, Dean Tony Lavinia, we are going to have more episodes on charter change. There is so much to talk about on charter change. Hindi talaga kakasya sa kalahating oras sa isang gabi. Maraming salamat po sa inyo, Professor Dean Tony Lavinia. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go now back to Attorney Christian Monsod, who's joining us now via telephone. Medyo bagsak po ang signal ng Zoom. Siguro talagang ganyan pag charter change ang pag-uusapan. So, Attorney Monsod, like my question earlier, no, do we need to amend the Constitution? If yes, how do we go about it?
Can I just comment on that?
Yes, sir.
I'm not in favor of a constitutional convention because the delegates to the convention will be the same people who are in Congress now because they'll be elected by district primarily. And so we cannot expect any changes as if it were a constitutional assembly. And it is not a time for that for me because the legislature is totally dominated by feudalistic clans that's rooted in a system for so long, and it takes a long time to do it. They didn't even pass the anti-dynasty law for 35 years.
Well, every Congress, 3/4 of the members are members of political families.
Correct.
But kanina po ang sabi nga ni Dean Tony is we will be able, kung kon-kon daw, an election of delegates, we will be able daw to weed out yung mga politiko if you put, for example, hindi pwedeng tumakbo a certain number of years, hindi pwedeng ma-appoint a certain number of years after the Constitution is ratified. Hindi.
But the delegates will be by district primarily, hindi ba?
So pareho lang yung tatak.
Pareho rin yan.
Okay. So how do we go about it? Mag-con-as na lang? Ganun po ba?
No, I think I'm questioning why there is a need to change or revise the Constitution.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
Because if our objective here is a just and humane society, right? That was the promise of EDSA, the restoration of democracy, and the promise of social change, especially to the poor. And that's why the heart of the Constitution is social justice. Because if you read the social justice, it's about trying to address not just mass poverty, but gross inequalities. And that's what the political dynasties are about, correct?
Right.
Now, in fact, that together, next to the social justice article, is on the economy. And the principles of in the article on the economy is also social justice.
So, Attorney Monsod, to creatively address all these problems and challenges that those who want charter change say must be addressed, pwede naman pong, as you have already pointed out, we can pass laws, which we have done very recently, which Congress has done very recently, or we can amend certain laws. Right, sir?
No, let me put it this way. The reason we haven't effectively addressed the social justice problems is because we are not implementing the 1987 Constitution. The 1987 Constitution is not the problem. It is part of the solution. Where are you going to change it? And I'll tell you, even the social change, the social reform program, like agrarian reform, there are 4, right? Asset reform, agrarian reform, urban land reform, housing, ancestral domain, and fisheries, where the poorest of the poor are. And number 2, of course, education and health. That's the longer term. Now, look at all the laws they have passed. They have passed laws with loopholes. The big one is, of course, in agrarian reform, you can distribute shares of stock instead of land. Can you imagine? They call that agrarian reform. That's a Hacienda Luisita, right? And if you go into the other provision, and then of course they underfunded it. And the other loophole is 25-year lease. How can there be a 25-year lease of land? What are the farmers going to do?
Okay, so Attorney, yes.
Okay, so that's my point.
Yes.
Is that unless we fully implement the social justice program of the Constitution, we will not have a new social order. The poor have been waiting for it for 35 years. And now you will say, we will change the constitution, and they'll finally get it with the same people as in the Congress now in the political dynasties.
Okay. And it's not going to be acceptable either, like you said, if they pass laws that that are full of loopholes anyway, and therefore do not live up to the tenets and principles of the 1987
And
Constitution.
moreover, the Duterte administration, the development plan of the Duterte administration did not include charter change. There are 300 targets, did not include charter change. And the inaugural speech of President Marcos did not mention charter change as the means in order to attain the purposes of the administration. Why is it being pushed now? By whom?
All right. Attorney Christian Monsod, thank you so much, sir, for being with us tonight. Sana nag-zoom na lang po tayo. May problema lang po talaga tayo sa signal. But definitely, this is not going to be the last episode on charter change. I'm sure hahaba pa itong diskusyon. Maraming salamat po,
Salamat
Attorney
po.
Monsod. Thank you so much. We'll be back after a quick break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. This is Politics as Usual. We're still discussing charter change. We have for our next set of guests retired Supreme Court Associate Justice and a member of the 1986 Constitutional Commission, Adolf Ascuna. Justice Ascuna, magandang gabi po sa inyo. And later on, we will be speaking to IBP National President Bert Estrada. But Justice Ascuna, kayo po muna. So I know that we don't have much time, but I just wanted to get some very basic questions out of the way. Do you feel the need to amend the Constitution, that same Constitution which you helped form and create? Why or why not? And if we do, how do we go about it?
Yes, Pia, I believe that we should amend the Constitution now, but only the economic provisions of the Constitution, because these were not meant to last for 35 years. And economic policies should be flexible. I have proposed a way of amending it that is very simple, and it is just to add the words "unless otherwise provided by law" in the strategic places in these economic restrictive provisions, and that will convert them, if approved by the people as an amendment, into a provision that is changeable by legislation. So that will become
Legislation.
flexible.
Legislation lang.
Yes.
Okay. So unless
Legislation, because we amend it by inserting the words "unless otherwise provided by law."
in which particular economic provision, sir?
There is a pending resolution in the Senate by Senator Padilla that would target only three restrictive economic provisions. One is on public utilities, which requires right now a 60-40 arrangement. The other is mass media, which is required to be 100% Filipino now. And the other one is educational institutions, which also should be 60-40 right now. So if you put "unless otherwise provided by law," we can pass a law that will change the proportion under the Constitution.
Okay, when you say legislation, so this present Congress, the Senate and the House, can simply do that? How is this going to happen again, Justice Ascuna?
Yes, we have to amend the Constitution first by proposing to insert that "unless otherwise provided by law" in the constitutional provision.
Okay, so
If the people approve, if Congress approves that proposal and then it's submitted to a plebiscite and the people approves the amendment, then the provision in the Constitution as amended is now a provision, a restriction that is changeable by legislation.
Kanina po, Justice Ascuna, merong issue between, Dean Tony was saying hindi pwedeng mag-con-con. Sabi naman ni Attorney Christian Monsod, hindi pwedeng con-con kasi you're going to have the same people who run for elective office running for con-con. No? In other words, the same banana, same people. So how are we going to do this? What do you think? Con-con tayo o mag-con-as? And then, of course, there's that whole discussion naman about voting separately ng two chambers.
Sa ngayon, sa tingin ko, ang kailangan talaga itong economic restrictions sa Constitution matanggal dahil we need the foreign investments, the good kind, to come in dahil sa very difficult economic times that we have. The rest of the revisions can wait later for a constitutional convention. But right now, limited to the economic provisions so that the political proposals of extending the terms and all that will not be included. Just the economic provisions, and that's doable. And we now have the sufficient majority in both the Senate and the House to get the proposal adopted.
Do you think this is going to succeed, Justice Ascuna? Because we've been talking about charter change practically every single year. And then it becomes such a big issue, ang daming mag-aaway, ang hab-haba ng diskusyon, ng debate, and then ang ending is walang nangyayari. What's going to happen this time around? You know, are we going to get are you going to get what you want, you think?
Yes. I am hopeful because, as I said, there is now a clear majority of the party in power. They can push for this change if they want to. Limited economic provisions. In fact, only 3 targeted provisions under the Senator Padilla resolution. Let's see if that can be done.
Justice Adolf Ascuna, sir, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We will have more episodes on this dahil I'm sure mahaba pa yung debate tungkol dito. Maraming salamat po sa inyo, Justice. We're going to speak now to the National President of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, Attorney Bert Estrada. Hi, sir. Thank you for joining us. Can we begin with, well, I'm sure you're going to say, yes, we need to amend the Constitution. But let's jump to the question about how we go about it. Con-con po ba tayo o con-as o People's Initiative? How should we do this? Attorney Bert?
Yes, good evening, Ma'am Pia. Thank you for having me. With regards to the method, I think both Dean Tony and Attorney Christian raised valid points. But for me, I would prefer the Constitutional Convention, as I believe it's more democratic and more inclusive. And of course, there is that danger that is pointed out by Attorney Christian that perhaps the same people will be constituting this assemblies. They are in power. But as pointed out by Dean Tony, that certain limitations can be placed. But of course, where there is not a constitutional amendment or revision is timely is always also the question. And if there is a need to change the Constitution or provisions thereof, my personal opinion or my pet peeve as pointed by Dean Tony is on the provision on political dynasty. As I believe that we've been waiting for an enabling law from Congress, but none has been enacted except that one in the Sangguniang Kabataan. And I believe that this has now to be amended in our Constitution to already make it a self-executing provision so that this long-standing issue on political dynasties can finally be resolved.
When you say self-executing provision, how is that going to work? In other words, we don't need an enabling law anymore and automatically, para bang certain degree, etc., hindi na pwedeng tumakbo sa susunod na halalan, halimbawa. Paano po yun?
Yes, when there's a self-executing provision, unlike in how it is framed now, that the Constitution mandates that Congress shall enact a law on anti-dynasty. If that provision is already placed in the Constitution, then that mechanism is self-executing, no more need for the legislation. But of course, this can also be done by legislation as mandated by the Constitution. But as I mentioned, we have been waiting for more than 30 years for Congress to perform this mandate, but none has come to fore.
Well, yeah, especially because 3/4 of their members are members of political families. I mean, the lower house, the House of Representatives. Also, you want to look at the party list system provision. What exactly do you want to see in an amended or revised charter regarding that provision?
Yes, I believe that it has to be clarified as to the purpose really of the party list system. Previously, it was, I believe, intended to provide this opportunity for inclusiveness, especially for the marginalized sector to be
Yung totoong
represented in
marginalized.
Congress. However, in the changes in the interpretation of the Constitution and the laws enacted, it has drastically changed. And what we see now is that the party list system is, personally, I believe, no longer serves that original intent of providing inclusivity, especially to the marginalized sector.
What do you mean,
So
Attorney?
I believe there has to be clarity there.
What do you mean, Attorney Estrada? Because sometimes we see former district representatives running for the party list seats, right? That is what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because I believe personally that the original intent, the framers, was to provide that equal opportunity for public service. And because the marginalized sectors do not have the means to mount a national campaign or to get elected into seats in Congress to participate in policy making, then the party list system was mandated by the Constitution to enable sectoral representation, especially from the marginalized sector, to participate in the lawmaking and policy making in Congress.
Attorney Bert Estrada, marami pa po tayong pag-uusapan, but not tonight. There will be other episodes because this is going to be a long, very, very long debate, as always, as we've seen in the last 3+ decades. Maraming salamat po sa inyo, Attorney Bert Estrada of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines. We're going to take a very quick break. When we return, we'll take a closer look at the Senate hearings on constitutional amendments. This is Politics as Usual. We're on our final stretch. This is Politics as Usual. Our Senate correspondent, Amor Santos, joins us here in the studio. Hi, Amor. You are what we call, and this is to explain to our viewers, no, an anchor friend, the anchor's friend. Para bang hindi ka naman guest ng show, but although not a co-anchor, but mag-uusap tayo, no? Okay, Amor, you've been covering the Senate hearings, no? But before that, and very quickly, very briefly, and I hope you can do that in 2 sentences. Good luck to you. How charter change fared in the 17th and the 18th Congress, which covers the 6 years of the Duterte administration, and how it is starting out in the Senate. Sige nga, I challenge you to say it in 3 sentences.
Pressure. All right. Well, Ms. P, clearly in
lang,
2 sentences, Pia, in 2 sentences, charter change was never a priority under the Duterte administration by both the 17th and 18th Congress ng Senate. So senators were very cold to charter change. There are statements from them saying it's good as dead in the Senate. There's not enough time for it. But here now, under the 19th Congress, we also have a new chairman of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments. Before kasi si Senator Kiko Pangilinan. And nung 18th Congress, there was only one hearing, committee hearing on this charter change. And then the constitutional framers who were invited, they all said it's not a good time, pandemic, and also 1 year na lang before yung 2022 election. So any attempts to amend the Constitution then would be seen as an attempt to extend the official's term. So now, under a Padilla-led committee, 1 month pa lang into the 19th Congress, but third hearing now on Friday. So Senator Robin Padilla has made it clear it is his priority. It's one of the priority measures he filed under the 19th Congress. And
But he's zeroing in on economic provisions, no?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
He wants to
As
focus.
kanina, sinabi nga ni Justice Adolfo Ascuna. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and also Senator Win Gatchalian also filed a resolution. Yun din yung gusto niya, focusing on economic provisions. Actually, he wants to limit the changes as much as possible to economic provisions alone. Si Senator Win naman.
Are you saying that there are better chances now, and because like I was saying na nga kanina sa mga guests, in the last 3 decades, taon-taon, gano'n naman pag-uusapan ng charter change. Oh no, it's the wrong time. Oh no, this is self-serving. long story short, ang ending palagi is hindi natutuloy. What's going to happen this time around?
Well, actually, the first time we interviewed Senate President Mig Subiri, he said it shouldn't be a priority. It's too controversial. But then we have Senator Robin Padilla. He's a neophyte senator, but then he's also the top notcher, and then he's the head of this committee. And he's now saying that the Senate, under his watch on the Senate committee, will be prioritizing this measure. Talagang pinupush niya to, and the advocates, including former Undersecretary Jonathan Malaya, who was part of efforts before dun sa mga consultations sa mga stakeholders on charter change, talagang all praises sila kay Senator Robin Padilla for leading these charter change hearings. And even si Attorney Christian Monsod, the first hearing, he said na actually, although neophyte senator daw si Robin Padilla, and he's not even a lawyer, first non-lawyer to head the committee, he's quite doing well daw in handling the debates. So we're seeing, although syempre may back and forth pa din, every time na may hearing, katulad ng nakita natin kanina, talagang may matataas ang emotions ng advocates for, and then yun din namang mga warnings from, for example, from Attorney Monsod, talagang he's warning against a sweeping revision of the Constitution. So we're still seeing this heated debates in the Senate, but ang pagkakaiba nga ngayon, priority siya nung committee chairperson.
Okay, dalawang pagkakaiba. So priority siya ngayon ng committee chairman, at yung committee chairman mismo pinag-uusapan dahil nga bagito or neophyte, hindi naman siya abogado. But like you were saying, so he is doing well. How does the Senate media see him? Kayo, mga reporters?
Well, on the reporter side, masipag si Senator Robin. So kahit Friday, usually kasi po ang Friday is medyo break for the Senate media yan. Pero si Senator Robin is calling for hearings kahit Friday. And speaking of that, third committee hearing on Friday, and he said ang magiging focus daw po will be yung economic provisions. Senator Win Gatchalian earlier requested to invite NEDA and other officials, other economic managers. And that will be the focus.
Mabilis last Thursday yung first hearing, tapos yung pangalawa last Friday. Ba, masipag. Okay, sige. So, like I said, we are way out of time. All right. So, but Amor Santos, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I'm sure you're going to be still guessing on the show in the very near future. Mahaba pa diskusyon nito, mahaba pa debate. We've been told before, don't talk politics at the dinner table or the family reunion or in group chats, and risk warfare, digital and otherwise. But we can talk about it here at this table on this show. Your weekly political appointment fix, politics as usual. I'm Pia Hontiveros. See you back here next Wednesday, 8 p.m.